Just leave him, he'll find his own way. The truck door slammed with a metallic thud, and the convoy rumbled on, its taillights disappearing into the dust-hazed horizon. The small figure it left behind didn't chase after it. He didn't bark, he just stood there, legs trembling, tail low, ears pinned back against his skull. His name was Koda, though no one had ever called him that out loud. He was too young to understand betrayal, but old enough to feel it. The road was cracked and lonely, the kind that doesn't belong to maps, the kind where ghosts of old battles linger in the rusted barbed wire and wind-worn signs. A faded canvas bag, torn at the seam, lay where the truck had stopped. Koda curled beside it, pressing into the last familiar scent, the one that smelled of dust, gun oil, and something faintly warm. Something human. He didn't know it yet, but he wasn't entirely alone. 200 kilometers away, under a makeshift camo net stretched over a field hospital, Sergeant Elias Farrow was fighting the kind of war no weapon could win. His left leg was gone below the knee. The right one barely responded. The last image he remembered before the blast wasn't of his brothers in arms, or the fire that split the air. It was of a puppy, wriggling in his duffel bag, chewing on a bootlace while Elias muttered, "Damn mutt's got better instincts than command." Elias had found Koda behind a collapsed clay house 2 months ago, just bones and breath and those amber eyes too big for his face. The pup had followed him ever since, weaving through fire zones and forward camps, sleeping with his nose tucked under Elias's arm in bitter desert nights. No one knew why Elias kept him, but everyone knew what the pup meant in a place where men vanished and silence followed like fog. Koda was proof something innocent could still choose to stay. Back at the roadside, the days were colorless. Koda stayed. He didn't chase cars. He didn't follow Passarsby. He just lay beside that old bag, through rains that turned the dust to rust-colored sludge, through heat that made the road shimmer like a dream. Locals passed and whispered. Some tried to feed him. Others tried to scare him off, but he stayed, as if some invisible leash still tied him to the soul that once held him. Children began to call him the ghost dog. Shopkeepers left scraps beside the post where he waited, and every evening just before sunset, Koda would stand, eyes locked, to the horizon, not moving, just watching. Some said he was waiting for the man who fed him. Some said he was waiting for the man who left him. But the old woman who ran the tea stall near the bend in the road had a different theory. He wasn't left, she said softly. One evening, stroking Koda's matted fur, he was told to wait, and he listened. No one argued, not anymore. Because sometimes, when the wind shifted just right, people swore they heard a voice on the breeze. Hoarse, tired, laced with dust, and regret. A soldier's voice. "Stay here, boy. I'll come back, I promise." And the pup would lift his head, tail twitching, eyes burning into the distance. Just for a second. Just long enough for hope to feel like memory, and the road that silent, empty road never forgot a single paw print. The wind changed on the 12th day. It rolled in low and dry across the scorched earth, dragging torn leaves and cigarette wrappers past Koda's paws. The little German shepherd mix didn't move. He had learned not to. Movement was for those who still had somewhere to go. He just blinked slowly, watching the empty stretch of road that had offered nothing but silence since the convoy disappeared. His ribs had begun to show beneath his coat, dust clinging to every hair like he was being slowly erased by the world around him. But his eyes hadn't changed, still locked on the same vanishing point, still waiting for that one face to reappear. Through the heat waves, he didn't notice the man in the doorway of the tire shop across the street. Fahim had been watching the dog from behind a cracked pair of binoculars for days now. Fahim had once served in the same army that passed through here years ago, before the limp in his right leg and the shrapnel in his shoulder made him more useful behind glass than behind a gun. He didn't trust Isserly but the dog. The dog never begged, never whined, never moved from that canvas bag. And that kind of loyalty, Fahim recognized it, the way old soldiers recognize each other. Quiet, heavy, earned. On the 13th evening, a supply truck backfired at the far end of the street. Koda bolted up, not ran, bolted. Tail straight, eyes burning, legs trembling with sudden fire. He darted 10 steps forward before stopping dead, ears twitching, chest heaving. But it wasn't them. The truck rolled past, indifferent, its metal frame groaning like old bones. Koda turned back, tail drooping, and returned to the same spot, curling around the bag like he hadn't just shattered from the inside. Fahim crossed the road with a paper plate in his hand that night. He'd been told not to feed the strays. Soldiers' orders, sanitation warnings. But Fahim wasn't feeding a stray. He was feeding a fellow soldier. He knelt, set the plate down, and didn't speak, just waited. After 5 silent minutes, Koda inched forward, sniffed, and ate without taking his eyes off the road, far from that broken town, in a rehab center that smelled like antiseptic and steel. Elias Farrow sat in a chair that used to have 4 legs and now only needed 3. His stump itched like hell, but he wouldn't scratch it. He hated the weakness in that gesture. Every morning he was made to repeat the same words. Progress isn't a straight line, and every time they said it, he wanted to throw something, but what haunted Elias wasn't the pain or the therapy, it was the silence. the silence of a leash still clipped to his belt. He didn't remember much after the explosion, just fragments of metal shriek, a flash, hands dragging him from wreckage. But when he woke up 3 weeks later in a hospital without windows, Kota wasn't there. The medics hadn't seen him. Command said they didn't retrieve animals from active zones, no records, no rescue. They told Elias he must have imagined it. A hallucination, a comfort projection. No such pup was on the manifest. He stopped speaking after that. Dot stopped believing. But late at night, when nurses whispered in corridors and machines hummed like distant engines, Elias would hear the faint sound of claws tapping against the floor, always just out of reach. He told no one until the letter came. It wasn't a formal letter, just a grease-stained envelope with his name scrawled in urgent handwriting. Inside a blurry photograph and 3 sentences. He's still waiting. Same spot every day at sunset. The photo was grainy but unmistakable. The old canvas bag, the same cracked road, and curled beside it Kota, older, thinner, dustier, but watching the horizon the same way Elias remembered. His hands trembled, not from pain this time, from something sharper. He was still here, still real, not a projection, not a dream. And he'd stayed because Elias had told him to. The next morning, Elias signed a discharge request against medical advice. It took him 3 days to get cleared, another 2 to arrange transport. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. They wouldn't understand. Back in the village, Fahim sat by the tea stool, eyes narrowed behind dark glasses. The dog hadn't moved for hours. Something was different today. The air was too still. Even the flies buzzed quieter. He stood, one hand resting on the hilt of his walking stick. Then, the bus came. It was old, dusty, rattling like bones in a tin can. Most people didn't look twice. Just another vehicle through a town people forgot. But Fahim saw the figure that stepped off. The limp, the crutch, the sun-hitting dog tags that swung freely across his chest. And Kota saw it too. He didn't wait. He ran. Not like a starving dog, not like a stray, like a soldier who had just been released from a long, painful post. His paws thundered across the dirt. His bark tore the air open, and Elias, who hadn't cried since he was 12, dropped his crutch and fell to his knees, arms open. They didn't need words. They never had. The reunion wasn't perfect. Elias still couldn't walk properly. Kota's ribs still showed. The road was still cracked, and the horizon still stretched empty. But they had each other again, and for the first time in weeks, the bag didn't lie alone on the ground. It was carried. The 3rd month passed with the sky showing no mercy. The rains had ended, but the cold that followed seeped deep into Kota's bones. His ribs had grown sharper, like the edge of broken glass, and his once plush fur was now a clumped mess of mud and old wounds. Still, he stayed day after day at the same bend in the road, beside that frayed canvas bag. He didn't whimper anymore. He didn't bark. He just waited, like the road itself had rooted him there, like movement would betray a promise only he remembered. People came to know him. The boy who sold roasted corn started leaving half an ear each morning. A young girl would cross the street, just to place boiled rice mixed with chicken skin on a folded leaf beside his paw. He never begged, never licked a hand. He only watched the road with those amber eyes that carried too much silence for a creature so small. But one day, something broke the rhythm. It was late afternoon when a military jeep rolled up the same cracked road. It wasn't unusual to see convoys pass, but this one slowed near the bend. The driver, a thick-jawed corporal with dark circles under his eyes, squinted at the figure by the side of the road. Kota didn't move, just like always, but his ears tilted slightly. The passenger stepped out. His uniform was sharp, not yet bleached by sun or stained by war. A new recruit, perhaps, or a desk officer trying to connect with the field. He stared at the pup. "Is this the one?" the officer asked. The corporal nodded. "Dogs. Been here every day. Locals say he's been waiting 3 months. For who? Some say a soldier. Some say no one. Doesn't matter. He won't move." The officer walked closer, stopping a few feet away. He crouched low, offering a biscuit from a sealed ration packet. Kota didn't blink, didn't sniff, just watched him, as if trying to decide whether this man carried the same scent, the same voice, the same shadow of memory. He didn't take the biscuit. After a few seconds, he turned his head back to the road. The officer stood. Strange dog. But the corporal didn't answer. He just got back in the jeep. Before they left, he opened the window and said, almost to himself, "He's waiting for someone who's never coming back." That night, the wind howled across the village roofs. The power went out. Somewhere in the distance, a thunderless explosion shook the earth. A mine, maybe, or something worse. Most people turned in early, shutters drawn tight, but Kota didn't flinch. His eyes stayed on the horizon, tail flicking once like a whisper, and far away. In a military rehabilitation center wrapped in sterile white and echoing corridors, Elias Pharaoh sat staring at the prosthetic limb strapped to his thigh. He hadn't spoken much since his surgery. He had refused visitors. Only one thing sat on the table beside his cot, a tattered photograph. Not of his unit, not of his mother, but of a small pup curled beside a canvas bag, paws pressed against the boot of a sleeping man in desert fatigues. A nurse entered the room with a clipboard. "Sergeant Farrow," she began, but he interrupted her. "Where exactly was I picked up?" he asked. She blinked. "I can check your field report." "Not the coordinates. The last stop where I left my gear. Where we were told to evacuate." She hesitated. "You mean the southern ridge, outside the Nura Valley sector?" His hand tightened on the edge of the bed. "Yeah, that's the one." She nodded slowly, then paused as she noticed the way his jaw had set, like something inside him had decided not to break. "Not yet. I'll get your map." But he didn't need a map. He remembered every bend, every rise, every patch of gravel and dust, and he remembered what he had said to Coda that morning, just before the order came through. He hadn't meant to leave him. There hadn't been time. The explosion changed everything. But that final whisper, "Stay here, boy, I'll come back, I promise," had never left his mind. The next morning, Coda wasn't at the road. The girl who fed him froze when she saw the empty patch beside the bag. The boy with the corn ran in circles around the street calling out. Some feared the worst, that the cold or the hunger had finally taken him, or maybe the wild dogs that roamed the hills at night. But the bag was still there. The stone he always curled against was warm from his body, as if he'd left only moments ago. By sunset, the rumors spread a foreign soldier was seen in town, limping a cane in one hand, eyes searching like someone chasing ghosts. No one knew his name. No one asked. But when he reached the old tea stall near the bend, he didn't speak at first. He just stood. Then a soft noise broke through the air. From behind a cluster of crates, a small, ragged figure emerged. Coda's legs wobbled as he stepped forward, head low, ears flat, body unsure. But his tail began to move slowly at first, then faster, like the hands of a clock remembering time. Elias dropped the cane, fell to his knees, and without a sound, Coda collapsed into his arms. No one spoke, not the shopkeepers, not the children, not even the old woman who'd seen it all, because some reunions didn't need explanation. Some bonds weren't written in blood, or orders, or names. They were built in dust, in silence, in the waiting. And as the sun dipped low and the wind stirred the old road, the spot that once knew only patience now knew something else entirely. It knew home. The rain had returned, not as a gentle mist, but in sheets that hammered the tin rooftops and turned the broken road into a stream of brown, restless water. Coda didn't move. He hadn't moved in hours. His fur, once golden and soft, was now thick with mud and clumped into knots. But his eyes, those amber eyes, remained fixed on the same point in the distance, on the curve where the road bent, out of sight. Behind him, the stall owners were closing early. They looked at him like one looks at a tombstone, something sacred, something that holds a story you dare not disturb. The old woman, Oppie, brought a small piece of boiled chicken, and crouched beside him, her knees creaking as she moved. "Why do you punish yourself, little one?" she whispered, laying the food gently on the dry patch beneath the overhang. "You could come inside. You could forget." Coda didn't blink. He didn't turn his head, and when the thunder cracked, hard enough to rattle the loose wires overhead, he flinched but didn't leave his post. Oppie sighed and stood, brushing the rain from her arms. "One day," she muttered to herself, "either he will come, or that poor heart of yours will give up first." That night, while the town slept beneath a blanket of wet winds, something shifted. A vehicle, not the usual supply trucks or motorbikes, crawled up the road. It didn't roar. It crept, headlights, dim engine coughing like an old man too stubborn to die. Inside sat a man with a stump where his leg used to be and eyes that hadn't known rest in months. Elias Farrow clutched a picture in his hand, not of his squad, not of his medals or the men he'd saved, but a smudged photo taken on an old phone. A puppy in the crook of his arm, licking his face while he scolded it for stealing his sock. That photo had gotten him through the hospital, through the guilt, through the long, cruel silence after discharge. But the convoy had moved too fast that day, and he hadn't been given a choice. One minute there was gunfire and screams. The next, the transport was pulling him away with orders barked and blood soaking through the gauze on his thigh. He hadn't even had time to say goodbye. The truck sputtered to a stop near the bend. Elias leaned on his crutches and stared. His heart thundered against his ribs, not because he expected anything but because he feared everything. The rain had stopped now, and in the moonlight, he saw the stall. The empty crates stacked neatly, the hanging cloth wet and still. And then he saw him. Coda didn't move at first. He simply blinked. Slow, measured, as if his mind couldn't catch up to what his heart was telling him. Elias took a breath and whispered, "Coda," and that sounded cracked something wide open. Coda's ears twitched. His body stiffened, and then, like a dam breaking, he bolted forward with such force he slipped on the wet stone. His paws skidded. He yelped, but he didn't stop. He leapt, crashing into Elise's chest with enough force to knock one crutch loose. The soldier fell back against the side of the truck, laughing and choking on it all at once, tears mixing with rain, with breath, with disbelief. Coda licked every inch of his face, whining so high and fast it sounded like sobbing. He pawed at Elias's chest. buried his nose in the crook of his neck, and made a sound no one had ever heard from him before, a soft, aching whimper that seemed to say, "Why did it take so long?" Oppie had heard the commotion and shuffled toward the road, her lantern shaking in her grip. When she saw the soldier cradling the broken, ecstatic dog, she didn't call out. She didn't interrupt. She simply sat on the step, hand to her mouth, tears running silently down her wrinkled cheek. Elias stayed there for a long while, letting Koda climb all over him. The dog had grown, his legs longer, his ribs more pronounced. He smelled of dirt and smoke and time, but his eyes were the same. And in those eyes, Elias saw what he thought he'd lost: forgiveness, hope, and something deeper bond that had survived what neither of them should have. When the dawn began to seep into the world, soft and golden, the two of them sat side by side on the edge of the road, staring at the horizon. No leash, no command, no promises spoken, and yet they stayed together like they always had. The road, after all, had never truly been empty. It had simply been waiting for the sound of boots returning home and the heartbeat that never stopped listening. They didn't speak as the sun rose. The world around them stirred to life, broom bristles on concrete, shutters clattering open, the hiss of boiling water from the tea stall, but Elias and Koda stayed rooted where they were, shoulder to fur, breath to breath. There was something sacred in the silence, a kind of understanding that didn't need words. Koda rested his head on Ilias's knee, as if anchoring himself, as if to say, "If I let go now, maybe you'll disappear again." Ilias reached down with a shaking hand and scratched behind the pup's ears the way he always had, the way Koda had dreamed of each time the wind carried phantom footsteps across that lonely bend. The town gathered slowly, not in awe, not in spectacle, but in quiet witness. Shopkeepers leaned on doorframes, young boys pointed with wide eyes, and Oppie simply wept where she stood, her hands trembling around a cup of chai she'd brewed for someone she never really expected to see. No one approached. It wasn't the time for questions or celebration. It was a reunion years in the making, sealed in scars and silence, and something so tender it nearly hurt to watch. Elias rose slowly, adjusting the brace on what was left of his leg. Koda stood to tail wagging softly, unsure whether to leap or simply remain close enough to touch. "You waited," Elias whispered, not to anyone in particular, and not with pride but with disbelief, with gratitude. "After everything, you really waited." Koda gave a single huff, then pressed his forehead against Ilias's chest, the way he used to when the nights in the barracks grew cold and the sound of gunfire still echoed in their dreams. Later that afternoon, Ilias sat under the shade of the old fig tree where Koda had kept watch for all those months. He ran his hand along the trunk, now marked with small scratches where the dog had curled against it every night. Oppie brought out a bowl of stew and laid it at his feet, along with a second one for Koda. She didn't say anything, just gave him a long, knowing look, and walked away. The town had already decided. Ilias belonged here now, not as a soldier, not as a man shaped by war, but as someone who had come home to something more loyal than memory. Over the next few days, word spread, not through headlines or social media, but in quiet in shared cups of tea, in the way people pointed to that bend in the road and nodded as if it had finally given up a secret it had guarded too long. The boy from the radio shop painted a mural of the moment Koda midlep, Ilias arms open on the side of the tea stall. No grand banners, no dramatic colors, just earth tones, and a single line at the bottom: "He stayed." That evening, Elias and Koda walked through the village together for the first time. The soldier still limped, still leaned on his crutch, but Koda matched his pace, step for step, head high. And when they reached the end of the lane, the same corner where the road curved out of sight, Elias stopped. He looked out toward the empty path, once haunted by guilt and waiting. Koda looked too, and in that shared glance, it was as if both of them understood. This place no longer held sorrow. It held return. It held love proven true. As twilight settled over the town, the wind picked up, lifting dust and loose petals into the air. Koda trotted a few paces ahead, then turned to make sure Elias was still following. His tail gave a soft wag, and Elias smiled. "Lead the way, partner," he murmured, and with that the boy who had been left behind and the man who thought he'd never be forgiven walked on, not to escape the past, but to live what waited beyond it.